Marcus Finch was no stranger to the eerie silence of the late-night subway rides. His job as a janitor meant he often found himself on the last train home, the rattle of the subway car almost comforting in its regularity. One night, however, his routine ride took an unexpected turn. He noticed her as soon as he boarded the train. A young woman, her pale skin almost luminous in the dim light, sat alone at the far end of the car. Her clothes were out of place, a vintage dress that looked like it belonged to another era. Intrigued, Marcus chose a seat opposite her. She didn't seem to notice him, staring blankly ahead as if lost in thought. Rough night? Marcus attempted to break the ice, but she remained silent, her gaze unwavering. He shrugged and settled into his seat, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The train lurched forward, and he watched her out of the corner of his eye. As the train rumbled through the tunnels, Marcus tried to ignore the growing sense of unease. The woman hadn't moved an inch, and the air around her seemed colder. He felt a chill run down his spine as he noticed faint whispers, too soft to make out, but undeniably present. The car was empty save for the two of them, and Marcus's skin prickled with goosebumps. "Are you all right?" he asked again, louder this time. Still, no response. Frustration mingled with his unease. He got up and approached her, hesitating for a moment before gently touching her shoulder. In an instant, she turned to him, her eyes hollow and filled with a sorrow that took his breath away. "I'm lost," she whispered, her voice echoing as if coming from a great distance. Marcus stumbled back, his heart pounding. This was no ordinary passenger. "Who are you?" he managed to stammer. Her lips parted in a sad smile. "I'm Edith. I've been here for so long, waiting." "Waiting for what?" Marcus's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. "For someone to find me," she replied. "I died on this train, many years ago. Trapped between worlds, I can't leave until someone acknowledges my presence." Marcus felt a mix of fear and pity. "How can I help you?" "Remember me," she said simply. "Tell my story." The train screeched to a halt at Marcus's stop. He blinked, and she was gone, leaving only the cold air and an overwhelming sense of melancholy. He exited the train, his mind swirling with the revelation. Over the following weeks, he researched her name and found an old newspaper article about a woman who had disappeared in the 1940s, last seen boarding a subway train. Marcus shared her story with anyone who would listen, honoring her wish. And every night, as he rode the last train home, he would feel her presence, no longer haunting, but peaceful, grateful that she was no longer forgotten. Weeks turned into months, and Marcus found himself almost looking forward to his nightly rides. The once oppressive silence of the subway car now felt more like a shared solitude. Rough night? Marcus attempted to break the ice, but she remained silent, her gaze unwavering. He shrugged and settled into his seat, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The train lurched forward, and he watched her out of the corner of his eye. As the train rumbled through the tunnels, Marcus tried to ignore the growing sense of unease. The woman hadn't moved an inch, and the air around her seemed colder. He felt a chill run down his spine as he noticed faint whispers, too soft to make out but undeniably present. The car was empty save for the two of them, and Marcus's skin prickled with goosebumps. "Are you all right?" he asked again, louder this time. Still no response. Frustration mingled with his unease. He got up and approached her, hesitating for a moment before gently touching her shoulder. In an instant, she turned to him, her eyes hollow and filled with a sorrow that took his breath away. "I'm lost," she whispered, her voice echoing as if coming from a great distance. Marcus stumbled back, his heart pounding. This was no ordinary passenger. "Who are you?" he managed to stammer. Her lips parted in a sad smile. "I'm Edith. I've been here for so long, waiting." "Waiting for what?" Marcus's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. "For someone to find me," she replied. "I died on this train, many years ago. Trapped between worlds, I can't leave until someone acknowledges my presence." Marcus felt a mix of fear and pity. "How can I help you?" "Remember me," she said simply. "Tell my story." The train screeched to a halt at Marcus's stop. He blinked, and she was gone, leaving only the cold air and an overwhelming sense of melancholy. He exited the train, his mind swirling with the revelation. Over the following weeks, he researched her name and found an old newspaper article about a woman who had disappeared in the 1940s, last seen boarding a subway train. Marcus shared her story with anyone who would listen, honoring her wish. And every night, as he rode the last train home, he would feel her presence, no longer haunting, but peaceful, grateful that she was no longer forgotten. Weeks turned into months, and Marcus found himself almost looking forward to his nightly rides. The once oppressive silence of the subway car now felt more like a shared solitude. He would often speak aloud, recounting his day or sharing memories, hoping that Edith could hear him and feel less alone. One particularly cold night, as Marcus boarded the train, he found a small, old-fashioned locket on the seat where Edith usually sat. Inside was a faded photograph of a young man, presumably a loved one she had lost. Marcus felt a pang of sadness and a renewed determination to piece together more of her story. He visited local libraries, delved into archives, and spoke to elderly residents who might remember anything about Edith Hawthorne. Piece by piece, he reconstructed her life, a talented pianist, a devoted daughter, and a woman who had mysteriously vanished, leaving a family in perpetual mourning. One evening, while Marcus was at the library, he came across a diary that belonged to Edith's sister, Margaret. The entries painted a vivid picture of Edith's final days and her inexplicable disappearance. Margaret had never given up hope, always believing her sister's spirit lingered, yearning to come home. Armed with this new information, Marcus decided to hold a small memorial at the subway station where Edith had last been seen alive. He invited local historians, the media, and anyone who had been touched by her story. To his surprise, dozens of people showed up, including some of Edith's distant relatives who had heard about the event. As they gathered on the platform, Marcus spoke about Edith, sharing her story and the impact she had on his life. The air felt charged with an almost palpable energy. When he finished, he placed the locket on a small makeshift altar and stepped back. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the station, and the lights flickered. For a brief moment, Marcus saw her, Edith, standing among them, her face serene and free of the sorrow that had once haunted her. She nodded, a silent thank you, before slowly fading away. The crowd gasped, some murmuring in awe, others wiping away tears. Marcus felt a profound sense of peace. He knew that Edith had finally found her way home. From that day on, the whispers ceased, and the cold spots vanished. The subway car that had once felt like a tomb now felt like any other. Marcus continued his nightly rides, forever changed by his encounter with Edith Hawthorne, a ghost who had found solace through the simple act of being remembered. Lauralee Vance had always found solace in the humdrum of her daily subway rides. The rhythmic clatter of the train was a welcome distraction from the monotony of her job at the Chicago Public Library. But one evening, as she settled into her usual seat, she heard something that shattered her routine, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. She looked around, but the car was mostly empty, save for a few tired commuters. Shrugging it off as her imagination, Lauralee pulled out a book and tried to read. But the whispers persisted, growing louder and more distinct. They seemed to be coming from the walls of the subway car itself. "Help me." Lauralee's heart skipped a beat. She glanced around, but no one else seemed to hear it. She leaned closer to the wall, straining to catch the words. "Find him." The whispers stopped as abruptly as they had started, leaving Lorelei shaken. Over the next few days, the whispers became a regular occurrence. They seemed to follow her, growing more desperate and insistent. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was trying to communicate with her. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Lauralee began researching the history of the subway system. She discovered that the station she frequently used had a dark past. In the 1920s, a series of accidents had plagued the construction of the tunnels, resulting in numerous deaths. One name stood out, Samuel Blackwood, a worker who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Intrigued, Lauralee dug deeper and found an old photograph of Samuel. His eyes seemed to bore into hers as if pleading for help. The whispers grew louder that night, urging her to find his resting place. Guided by the whispers, Lauralee ventured into an abandoned section of the subway. The air was thick with dust and decay, and the darkness seemed to close in around her. She followed the whispers, her flashlight flickering as if struggling against the oppressive gloom. Finally, she reached a collapsed section of the tunnel. Her heart raced as she noticed a faint glow emanating from beneath the rubble. With trembling hands, she began to dig, unearthing an old, rusted toolbox. Inside, she found a worn leather wallet containing Samuel's identification card and a locket with a faded photograph of a young woman. Lorelei felt a surge of sadness as the whispers intensified, filling her mind with fragments of Samuel's final moments. He had been trapped in a cave-in, unable to escape. The whispers were his desperate attempts to reach out, to be remembered. "I found you," Lorelei whispered, tears streaming down her face. The air around her seemed to warm, and the oppressive darkness lifted. The whispers ceased, replaced by a sense of peace. Lorelei ensured that Samuel's story was told, sharing his tragic tale with anyone who would listen. The whispers never returned, but Lorelei knew that Samuel had finally found rest, thanks to her. Days turned into weeks, and Lorelei found herself reflecting on Samuel's life and untimely death. She visited his gravesite, a neglected corner of a forgotten cemetery, and arranged for it to be restored. She placed fresh flowers there regularly, a small gesture to honor the man who had been lost to history. One evening, as she boarded her usual train, she noticed something different. The air seemed lighter, and the oppressive feeling that had once accompanied her rides was gone. She took her seat and pulled out a book, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Samuel. As the train approached the old abandoned station, it slowed to a crawl. Lorelei glanced out the window and saw a faint, spectral figure standing on the platform. It was Samuel, his form clearer and more at peace than she had ever seen. He nodded to her, a silent thank you for giving him the recognition he had sought for so long. Lorelei smiled, a sense of closure washing over her. She had given Samuel a voice, and in doing so, had freed him from the shackles of his tragic past. The train picked up speed again, and Samuel's figure faded into the distance. From that day forward, Lorelei made it her mission to uncover and share the forgotten stories of others like Samuel. She started a blog detailing her experiences and the histories of the restless spirits she encountered. Her following grew, and soon she was receiving messages from people all over the world, each with their own tales of haunted places and lost souls. Lorelei became known as the Whisperer, a title she wore with pride. She used her platform to advocate for the preservation of historical sites and the respectful remembrance of those who had passed. Her work brought peace to countless spirits and comfort to the living. And through it all, she never forgot Samuel Blackwood. His story had been the beginning of her journey, a journey that had brought meaning and purpose to her life. She visited his grave often, always leaving fresh flowers and a whispered promise to keep listening, to keep helping. For Lorelei Vance, the whispers in the dark had become a guiding light, leading her to a greater understanding of the world beyond and the stories that needed to be told. Otis Merritt had always been fascinated by urban legends. His curiosity often led him to explore abandoned places, and when he heard about the old, disused Line 12 of the Los Angeles subway system, he couldn't resist investigating. He convinced his friends, Tessa and Riley, to join him on the adventure. The entrance to the tunnel was hidden behind a rusted gate, long forgotten by the city. As they made their way inside, the darkness swallowed them, and the air grew colder. The beam of their flashlights pierced the gloom, revealing graffiti-covered walls and debris-strewn tracks. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Tessa's voice wavered. "Relax, it's just a tunnel," Otis reassured her, though he felt a chill of unease himself. They ventured deeper, the sound of their footsteps echoing eerily. Suddenly, Riley stopped, shining his flashlight on a faded poster. It depicted a young woman with a hauntingly familiar face, missing since the 1970s. Her name was Clementine Graves. Otis felt a shiver run down his spine. He had heard stories about Clementine, a young woman who had been brutally murdered in the tunnel. Her body was never found, and it was said that her spirit still roamed the darkness, seeking revenge. "Guys, I think we should leave," Riley suggested, but Otis was determined to press on. As they continued, the air grew colder, and an unsettling silence enveloped them. They reached a section where the tunnel had collapsed, creating a narrow passage. Squeezing through, they entered a cavernous chamber, the walls adorned with strange symbols and markings. A sudden gust of wind extinguished their flashlights, plunging them into darkness. Panic set in, and they fumbled to turn their lights back on. When they did, they saw her, a spectral figure, her eyes hollow and filled with rage. "Leave this place!" Clementine's voice echoed through the chamber, chilling them to the bone. Otis felt a cold hand grip his shoulder. He turned, but no one was there. The ghostly figure moved closer, her presence oppressive and suffocating. "We're sorry," he stammered. "We didn't mean to disturb you." The ghost's expression softened, and she seemed to waver, torn between anger and sorrow. "Find my killer," she whispered, her voice filled with anguish. "Only then can I rest." Determined to help, Otis and his friends began investigating Clementine's death. They uncovered old police reports and interviewed surviving witnesses, piecing together the tragic story. It led them to a man named Leonard Whitaker, a former subway worker with a dark past. With the evidence they gathered, they confronted Leonard, who broke down and confessed to the murder. The police reopened the case, and Leonard was finally brought to justice. Otis and his friends returned to the tunnel one last time. As they reached the cavernous chamber, they felt a warm breeze, and Clementine's spirit appeared before them. Her expression was one of gratitude and peace. "Thank you," she whispered before fading away, leaving behind a sense of closure and tranquility. After Clementine's spirit had found peace, Otis, Tessa, and Riley became local legends themselves. Their experience in the haunted tunnels of Line 12 spread throughout Los Angeles, sparking a renewed interest in urban exploration and the supernatural history of the city. They were frequently invited to speak at events, sharing their story with captivated audiences. Otis, driven by his encounter with Clementine, decided to pursue a career in paranormal investigation. He studied everything he could about spirits, hauntings, and the afterlife. With Tessa and Riley by his side, he founded a small investigation team dedicated to helping other restless spirits find peace. Their first case brought them to an abandoned hospital in downtown LA, rumored to be haunted by the ghosts of former patients. As they delved into the hospital's dark past, they encountered eerie phenomena, disembodied voices, shadowy figures, and inexplicable cold spots. But guided by their experience with Clementine, they approached the spirits with empathy and a genuine desire to help. Through painstaking research and countless nights spent in the haunted corridors, they uncovered the tragic stories of those who had died in the hospital's care. They held a memorial service honoring the forgotten souls and bringing closure to the families who had lost loved ones. The hauntings ceased, and the hospital, once a place of fear, became a historical site of remembrance. Their success led to more cases, each more challenging and mysterious than the last. They investigated haunted mansions, cursed artifacts, and even a haunted ship docked in the harbor. With each case, their reputation grew, and so did their understanding of the spirit world. But no matter how many spirits they helped, Otis never forgot Clementine. Her case had been the catalyst for their journey, and her story remained a constant reminder of why they did what they did. He often visited the tunnel where they had first encountered her, leaving flowers and speaking to the lingering energy of the place. Years passed, and the team continued their work, uncovering the hidden histories of Los Angeles and beyond. Their bond grew stronger, forged in the fires of their shared experiences and their commitment to bringing peace to the restless. And so the legend of Otis Merritt and his team lived on, a testament to the power of compassion and the enduring connection between the living and the dead. Their story, like Clementine's, was one of redemption, healing, and the unbreakable bond between this world and the next. Winston Draper had spent decades working as a conductor on the Boston subway. Now retired, he hoped to leave behind the haunting memories of a tragic accident that had occurred under his watch. But the past had a way of catching up with him. It started with strange occurrences in his home. Objects moved on their own, and cold spots appeared in the warmest rooms. At night, he heard whispers and saw fleeting shadows. Winston knew deep down that it was Harold Pritchard, the passenger who had died in the accident. Harold had been a young man with a bright future, cut short by a tragic mistake. Winston had always blamed himself, and now it seemed Harold's spirit had come to torment him. Determined to make amends, Winston decided to face his past. He returned to the station where the accident had occurred, a place he had avoided for years. The platform was eerily quiet, and as he walked along the tracks, he felt a presence behind him. Turning, he saw Harold's ghost, his eyes filled with sadness and accusation. "I'm sorry," Winston whispered, his voice breaking. "I never meant for this to happen." The ghost remained silent, but Winston felt a surge of cold air envelop him. He closed his eyes, memories of the accident flooding back. The screeching brakes, the panicked passengers, and the sight of Harold falling onto the tracks. It had been a moment of chaos, and Winston had been powerless to stop it. "I tried to save you," Winston continued, tears streaming down his face. "I've lived with this guilt every day." The air around him seemed to grow heavier, and Winston felt himself being pulled into the past. He stood on the platform, watching the events unfold as if they were happening in real time. He saw Harold, unaware of the danger, and himself, desperately trying to prevent the inevitable. As the scene played out, Winston noticed something he had missed before, a figure in the shadows, pushing Harold. It wasn't an accident, it was murder. Shocked, he turned to Harold's ghost. "You were pushed," he said, his voice trembling. Harold nodded, and for the first time, the sadness in his eyes was replaced by relief. He had wanted Winston to see the truth, to understand that it wasn't his fault. With renewed determination, Winston contacted the authorities and shared his discovery. An investigation was reopened, and it led to the arrest of a former subway employee with a history of violence. Justice was finally served, and Harold's spirit could rest. Winston returned to the platform one last time, feeling a sense of peace. The whispers and shadows in his home ceased, and he knew Harold had found closure. He stood on the empty platform, the weight of the past lifted from his shoulders, ready to embrace the future. In the weeks that followed, Winston found himself drawn back to the station where Harold had died. He felt a deep connection to the place, a mix of sorrow and relief. The station had become a site of both tragedy and redemption, a place where the past and present intertwined. One evening, as he stood on the platform, he noticed a small plaque that had been placed in Harold's memory. It was a simple, understated marker, but it carried profound significance. Winston traced the engraved letters with his fingers, feeling a sense of closure that had eluded him for years. Winston decided to dedicate his time to helping others who had experienced similar traumas. He volunteered at support groups for survivors of accidents and those who had lost loved ones. His story, once a source of shame, became a beacon of hope for others seeking forgiveness and healing. The community rallied around him, recognizing the strength it took to confront the past and find peace. He was invited to speak at local schools and community centers, sharing his journey and the lessons he had learned. His words resonated with many, and he became a beloved figure, known for his kindness and resilience. Years later, as Winston looked back on his life, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The haunting memories had been replaced by ones of connection and purpose. He had found a way to honor Harold's memory and transform his own pain into a force for good. Winston often visited the station, now a symbol of his personal journey. He would sit on the platform, listening to the distant hum of the trains, feeling a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. He knew that Harold's spirit had found rest, and so had he. In the end, Winston Draper's story was one of redemption and reconciliation. It was a testament to the power of facing the past, seeking the truth, and finding forgiveness. And as he stood on the platform, the echoes of the past faded into the gentle rhythm of the present, leaving behind only the whisper of hope and the promise of peace.